Hello and welcome to the Don't Panic, It's Just Data podcast, where we have a weekly conversation with people who are impacting the enterprise tech landscape. My name is George Shirikan. I'm a passionate advocate for the importance of data. Today, I'm joined by Matthew Kossi, Product Marketing and Solution Strategy, and Parijat Bose, Customer Success Manager at Stibo Systems, to discuss what sustainable sourcing is and why accurate data matters. Welcome.
Hey, George.
Hey.
Well, so sustainability is a big topic. Can we please just talk about it a little bit and expand on where you are involved?
Yeah, sure. I'll take that. So, yeah, you're right. It's a huge topic encompassing all kinds of things: corporate social responsibility and welfare of workers and employees. Where we really fit in as a data management company is around the huge challenge that organizations face about collecting the data they need for compliance and reporting. And just, it's still a very broad purview. So just to narrow that in a little bit, we're really looking at when organizations have products, finished goods, commodities, they need to understand all kinds of information about the provenance of those goods that they have, and to be able to authenticate that and to be able to have transparent evidence of, where those goods came from, what's in those goods, and really, what the environmental impact is of the goods that they're both selling and the packaging that they have and how they should be disposed of. And so we're really looking at organizations' products. And by extension, we are looking at not just products that our organizations manage, but also the supply chain and the transparency of that supply chain, the credentials of their suppliers, and also the locations where goods are manufactured and where they're shipped from. So, all these elements need to be captured as part of the vast amount of data that's needed for compliance reporting, both to regulatory bodies, but also to consumers as well.
Well, let's focus on that data piece then. Can you explain the issues surrounding the data completeness, accuracy, in the context of the supply chain that you're just mentioning?
Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll get started a little on that. So data accuracy and completeness has always been of importance. If we look at supply chain from the business operation or logistics or procurement, sales, and these days what we are seeing, it is also necessary for regulation. Regulatory bodies are demanding, as well as consumer is demanding for the completeness of information. And having that information not complete can not just cost from the brand image perspective, but have a regulatory levy as well if things goes wrong or information is incomplete. And many of the instances where we see things like greenwashing or green hushing instantiated by people across, even in the industries, are not from the perspective that it is the intentional missing of data, but the data was not complete or the information was not provided down the line somewhere. So having a check at the source of information, that the information is collected properly and percolated throughout the stakeholder group, is very, very important. And it also ensures the continuity of supply chain. We have seen how COVID impacted people. We have seen how climate change is impacting people. So having a complete view of the supply chain is also very, very important from the overall holistic business perspective.
Parijat, just to latch on to what you were saying there, what are some of those main challenges that companies face when knowing where their products are sourced and produced? So
the part of production and sourcing kind of varies in scope. So a chocolate can be sourced, the cocoa can be sourced from a country where the chocolate production happens in another country, and the sales and packaging happens in another country. So having a complete view of where these informations are and how to coordinate the regulation, because all these regions have their own regulatory requirements along with the logistic needs. To cater to that is very, very important for continuity of supply chain. Today, if you see bigger organization, even electronics, they are not built in a single place. One part is getting built in some place and the other in another. And assimilating that information is very, very important. If you look at regulation, say if I look at EODR perspective, the geolocation, for example, plays a very, very vital role, where which area this particular production is happening, that comes into picture. Whereas if I look at food wise, it is the FAO zones that matter. So the location has been important, and the location has been quite diverse from the industry perspective.
Got it. So from what I understand is really knowing where and how products are made is really essential for meeting those sustainability goals, adhering to regulations, everything in between. And of course, there's other benefits to it as well.
As well as where you are selling, so where your activity of sales is happening, that also plays into picture. For example, EUDR says that it's about the importing the product into trading or operations. So it can be made somewhere where the regulation was not applicable, but when it comes for commercial activities, then sometimes it gets into picture where it is being sold.
So you mentioned EUDR. How are some recent regulations influencing the demand for more transparent and complete data from companies?
So from transparency perspective, one part is that how deep down your supply chain you want to go ahead with. The due diligence part of it comes into picture, and also the granularity in which you want to report. You want to report on individual ingredient, or you want to get as a holistic product, whole information that comes into picture. But regulation wise, there are a lot of interlinks of regulation as well. If you look at sustainability development goals, where SDG 15.2, which talks about deforestation, it adheres to the same or similar timeline what EUDR is looking at, for example. Or there might be anti-hunger related some initiatives within the organization which adheres to other prevailing international regulations. Or even plastic, for example, in many cases, the PFAS plastic, where the California regulation, the regulations within Europe and over across the world kind of merges, whereas the plastic, the component kind of remains the same. So it is the same data catering to a multiple set of reporting and regulatory requirements is what we see across the industry.
Are there any other regulations that are coming up frequently besides these?
Yes, there are quite a few of the existing one kind of surfacing up, and there are always new regulations that are coming into picture. Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I read a report recently that currently there are over 1,200 different regulations, standards to which you could report, depending obviously on your territory, geography, industry classification, product categories. There are hundreds of them. And to Parry's point, the reporting to these becomes super complex because you are almost certainly likely to be reporting against far more than just one of these, and they have interconnected links. So from a data management perspective, being able to maintain that nexus of information and connect it to some supplier information or some product information to multiple different regulations and substandards of those regulations can become highly complex if you don't have very solid data management foundation to it. We talk to people about UN SDG goals that Parijat mentioned. Obviously, particularly in European Union, digital product passports are on the horizon for a number of product categories. And this is really about providing consumer information just as importantly as regulatory information. But that shouldn't exclude other territories. If you're selling into the European Union, as Parry pointed out, you would still need to adhere to a digital product passport piece of information. We talked about EUDR, the deforestation regulations, that encompasses practically anything and everything you've ever managed to see grown. And, the oil and the cocoa and the wood products and the pulp products, and that means packaging. And so the reach of these things becomes enormous. And what we've seen from our customers who are looking into what regulations they have to adhere to, which I've said there are numerous, it's just they're absolutely swamped with the amount of data that they're going to have to collect and manage.
Another thing what I keep seeing is these information are quite interrelated. Say you have a location which need to be child labor free, kind of adheres to one of the supplier who is operating from that location, who supplies you certain kind of product. So it's kind of a holistic 360-degree view of your product, your supplier, your location, and the compliances associated with them.
And I think to add to that, I keep going back to the data point. Parry mentioned the term greenwashing, which may or may not be a popular phrase wherever you exist, but well, one way or the other is that to overcome it, you need evidence. You need unambiguous, transparent, authenticated evidence. And that comes in the form of gathering certified data and having clean, accurate, trusted data. I guess going back to your original point, George, is, it's how we got involved in this conversation. Our customers who are using our solutions to manage data started asking us, how can you help us manage sustainability data? Because it's just as critical as any other business data type that they're looking after now.
Yeah. Sounds like a humongous task to take on. And so many companies have to, right? Because they need to meet all these regulatory requirements and sustainability goals. It's definitely not easy. Like you mentioned, all these massive amounts of data that needs to be managed properly. And besides of it being, accurate, complete, and everything else, you also need to identify that master record, that golden record, and make sure that you're not duplicating things across from multiple sources. And that's a challenge on its own too.
So, yeah, I've talked about, you can't have a sustainability strategy without having a data management strategy. And you're right, you need that foundational cornerstone of master data to which to tie all these other things. Otherwise, you just have the same problems you have in any other data strategy. Hundreds of applications, information stored in spreadsheets and Excel hell across the organization that we're trying to sort of get rid of and have this single source of truth of sustainability information.
And these days, there is no way out that if you do not wish to report, it is not a possibility that you do not report on certain things. Green hushing, for example, is also being monitored by the regulators, which means there is some impact in the sustainability, and you are not reporting is also a work against the due diligence that you are not reporting what has to be informed to the consumers and the regulators.
And there certainly comes a point that, as you say, George, you won't be able to trade without being compliant to a certain point. And already organizations, if you want to be a supplier to X other organization, you're already being asked for all kinds of credentials and certifications as to, what are your sustainability credentials? And if you don't meet those, you're knocked off the supplier list.
And that is also very closely being monitored. For example, Scope 3 emissions or GHG or Type 2 suppliers are also being monitored and quite in details.
Lots. And of course, that also differ from country to country and region to region, which for international companies multiplies that complexity as well. Are there any other specific data-related challenges that companies must address in order to comply with these regulations?
I think I've touched on many of those. I mean, the first and most obvious one is just the sheer volume and managing that in a sensible way. I mean, you can't just have your SKU in your database or your PIM, product information management application, and start adding hundreds and hundreds of attributes to each SKU. That's just not a sustainable, to excuse the pun, way of doing things. So having that good data management strategy, and the challenge we face here is that the people who are responsible for this, so lots of organizations are employing a chief sustainability officer or similar title. And these folk are not necessarily data management experts. And so they will absolutely need to go and become best friends with the chief data officer or the CIO or the master data manager or whoever it is, because they will face the typical challenges that we see: vast volumes of data spread around the organization, a huge amount of it now coming from external sources. So particularly having to onboard data from suppliers and their suppliers in a seamless way. And we know that, that can't be done in scale by swapping emails and spreadsheets with this information. So there has to be a systemized way of putting control around the collection and authentication of this information. And then, as you pointed out, to make sure it's not duplicated, to make sure it's accurate in its own right, but then test it. You then need to test it against, which reports are we, or which standards are we trying to comply with, and which reports do we need to produce? What are the assessments within those reports? And what are the criteria for passing those assessments? And then you have a whole process of checking that data to, against those assessment criteria to see if you're compliant or not. And if not, then what are you going to do? So there's a large test and report element to that data management process. And it's overwhelming, to be frank.
And another part I see is percolation of the information. So not all the stakeholder, if immediately informed of any changes, say a regulatory change happen or a sourcing zone become more endangered or more impacted due to some reason, that information needs to reach out to the logistics or the procurement team of the organization, and that needs to happen instantaneously. So one part is getting the data and another part is sharing to the right people at the right time.
So how does the master data management contribute to sustainability efforts?
So as we described, if I told you about products or customers that were stored in ERP systems and CRM systems and financial accounting systems and spreadsheets, and you had a plan to consolidate that, to cleanse it, to apply governance and control to it, to create a single source of that truth and to share it with other stakeholders, both internally and externally, that in a nutshell describes an MDM project. And this is the exact challenge that organizations face with something new in this instance, with sustainability information. So in essence, to put in place a solid foundation of master data, we need to treat sustainability data with the same process and, I guess, care and governance and curation as you would treat any other master data. So sustainability data has become another critical element. And just as you would treat the financial information of an organization so that you can report on that accurately, so you need to be able to do that with sustainability information. And MDM, it's just another use case for master data management is to manage the sustainability information to be gathered.
And as I think, George, you were also mentioning that getting that golden information, that non-duplicate information plays a huge role in one part is deduplication, another part is the avalanche of transactional information which follows through on sustainability information. That story is much eased out with master data management sitting on top of it.
Right. So master data management is this discipline in which the business and technology work together to ensure the accuracy, stewardship, semantic consistency, accountability of the enterprise official shared master data assets. So I want to talk to you about the technology. How would data management technology solutions like yours would help companies achieve their sustainability goals and ensure responsible sourcing?
So one part is having a clearer information exchange. One part is who is creating that information, the data governance side, clearer notification to all the stakeholders, ensuring that there is a single source of truth whenever it comes, whether it's your product, whether it's your supplier, you can identify for sure. And then having a life cycle of the data itself, because the product can have a life cycle or the supplier can have an association life cycle, but the sustainability part of it also have its own life cycle. Certification might expire. Audit might happen, which might invalidate the certification, for example. All these information capturing and sharing at instantaneous point, that is something that I feel is a key enabler from my perspective. How do you see it, Matt?
Well, I agree. I mean, just having the workflows in place, the approval processes, the reminders, as Parry points out, it's not just a product at any point in time. You know, it's from inception, from sourcing through commercial activity to end of lifing, and then also telling your consumers about the packaging. So it's not just the product itself, but it's the bottles that it comes in, and then the cardboard boxes that's wrapped in, and so all these components need to be dealt with. So in a product information management system, for instance, you're able to manage these complex hierarchies of product and packaging and have those alternate hierarchies depending on region, geography, how you bundle products in different stores. This is the complexity of these relationships becomes huge, and only in an MDM platform can you manage and maintain that accurately.
Yeah, and another part I see is the country-specific application. For example, a regulation which is there in Germany, the same regulation might have different criteria and conditions when it comes to Netherlands, for example. So maintaining such kind of information in the granularity of a country and region also is something that helped by the location and regions of the master data management.
Yeah, and I should have obviously that one of the end goals of master data management is to be able to share this data to who needs it. So, once you have that source of data, Parry talks about internal business operations, finance, logistics, procurement. There are a whole other set of calculations that would potentially need to be done. So organizations who are then having to calculate their scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, who are having to do other reporting in their ESG mandates, need this information to be able to create other calculations which they can then use for further reporting. So if you need all that information, you can't be going to 100 different places to try and collect it. Otherwise, you're never getting your reporting done.
So Stibo Systems has a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge in providing MDM solutions to help companies achieve their sustainability goals and ensure responsible sourcing. At what point should companies engage with Stibo Systems?
Is it from the sustainability perspective, or you're saying from the business perspective? I should think of day one itself. Like when you know what is your data, you have your SKUs in place. That's the time you should already think about what is your master data, because master data is something which is at the core of your business. So for me, it should have been thought yesterday, if not today.
You, as an organization, you stand to face significant financial compliance and reputational brand risk. And it started. These regulations are out. The deadlines are in place, and there's a massive amount to do. So it sounds cliche to say it, but if you haven't got started yet, you're late. So you have a huge task, and the organizations we speak to have all underestimated the size of this task and the volume of data they need to collect. And so you can't start soon enough.
Yeah. And I see most of the industries are focusing on circularity and optimization, and having these regulations as your compliance, we say as competitive advantage. You can already foresee how the industry is going ahead, and you can plan your days ahead from the business perspective. If
you want to sell your products in the international market in a year's time, you need to get started today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matthew and Parijat, so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you coming on. Also, thank you to everyone listening. We hope you took a lot away from today's podcast. For further information on what we've talked about, please head over to stibosystems.com. We'll be back with another episode in our podcast series. Until then, make sure you subscribe to this podcast on all major platforms and follow the conversation on our socials at EM360Tech on X and LinkedIn. And for more great daily content, head over to em360tech.com.